Hi, I'm Justin Moorman.
And I'm Katie Thornton, and this is the Re-Education of Schools podcast,
where we have open, honest conversations about how to better understand social emotional learning, trauma-informed care, the whys behind student behavior, and how to help kids navigate it all as they go through school and life.
All right, episode 9. It's about responding to a crisis. We got a little chatty. There's a lot to cover on this episode, so we'll be releasing it in 2 parts. So here we go. Here's part 1.
All right, welcome back. Episode 9, Look at Me Now, Responding to a Crisis. We are excited to kind of keep this conversation going and kind of delve into something that's maybe more like something that's happening like right now, obviously, instead of something that's like kind of in theory, that's proactive. Now all of a sudden something's happening that's potentially a crisis.
Yeah.
What do we do? You know, that's kind of where we're going to go today, and a little bit more in a future episode too, kind of wrap them up together.
Yeah.
And so I think that's probably where we'll end up going, even moving forward a little bit with the podcast, right? Now that we've kind of covered a lot of bases, moving forward, looking at a little bit more specific situations, and probably even going with some longer stretches of several episodes, just as a preview for everybody out there. Now you kind of know our plan.
Yeah.
Actually, that was us planning right now.
Yes,
we have not planned ahead far enough to know what we're doing. So that's us planning ahead right now. Okay, so crisis. This can look like a lot of different things. Let's kind of start off like talking a little bit about just the background about why this needs to be talked about.
Yeah, I think now that we're putting all the application to what we've been talking about, but I think in schools, if you've turned on the news, if you've seen the teacher shortage, if you're listening to post-COVID education right now, crisis is happening in our classroom. Our kids have experienced trauma and they're responding and showing us right now. And I think as we are looking inside classrooms and as we do trainings in our building, I think one of the biggest things that we've noticed is that we need to start really working on training people how to respond to the crisis.
Yeah.
That we're seeing that to be such a need, and having systems set up in schools, because I think where our misstep is, with good intentions, are responding, but maybe are escalating situations. And then I think that's what's really stressing out some of our regular classroom teachers. If we don't respond and have things taken care of and they feel like we have it, then that's really where we're seeing some impact.
Yeah, I was kind of thinking the same thing. Like there's this increase in students who may have these types of crisis in school. I think if you went back, a good handful of years, either we were... I think we had fewer kids who had experienced like an overall kind of trauma. And again, with COVID, like that's realistically what it is. And I think it accelerated and really highlighted in some families, like issues that were there that aren't necessarily like, life-threatening, like kind of issues, but like really brought to the forefront, problems that had kind of existed. So because of that, we're going to keep seeing, more and more traumatic kind of students with kind of trauma in their life. And then also it's going to come out in classrooms more and more. Yeah. Plus, I think we're getting away from the idea, hopefully, of just shipping kids who have some of these crisis kind of reactions to things off.
Yeah.
And so as we're not like just putting them elsewhere, that means that other people that maybe have not seen for 25 years of being in education, they haven't seen students in crisis very often. Now they're seeing it, and it's hard to manage, and it's kind of a lot to go through.
2 things came to mind when you said that. The first thing, those elsewhere places are full.
Sure.
Districts can't even get into, if your separate facilities. Those places have waiting lists to get in. So it's not even an option for some districts now, depending what county you live in. The second part is the learning loss that has happened with the COVID impacts. And then we're trying to bounce back into grade level standards. I think instructionally, if we don't start shifting some of our practices to really make differentiated individual instruction with some universal design, in there, then we're seeing kids that are having demands put on them that they can't possibly reach. So we're going from 0 to 100 really fast because they just can't keep up or not ready for the instruction. So I think those are all compounding into what we're seeing right now. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I think that's interesting. Okay. So like some of these foundational things then that like just schools need to have in place, like when you think of how this even begins, because it would be irresponsible to just assume that like we're starting like, okay, now there's crisis, like we should do some planning ahead. So what are some of like the really basic foundational things that you feel like need to be in place before we even start talking about an actual crisis.
Yeah, I think you have to have a plan in place. So, like if your building does not have a team, then that's really where you need to start. You need to have a response team. So a team that maybe whatever your district has adopted in terms of a crisis response. So we currently use CPI. I'm one of the trainers for the district.
Crisis prevention,
Prevention, intervention.
Yeah.
Yep. So that's you need to have team members that are on the team that are involved with whatever your district policy is. But you also need to look at creating a team that has some mental health support. So whether it's your school counselor, your psychologist, a mental health therapist you have in your building, because when we're talking about responding to kids in crisis, you need an intervention team that can come in and respond. That's been trained, that has a toolbox where just like you train with your police officer or fire department,
Sure.
right?
Yeah.
You train for response to crisis. The more you train, the more you are comfortable and you're not over responding because you're used to being in that situation often and can make those really logical decisions. So I would say your crisis response team needs to have an administrator on the team or someone acting as administrator. Justin and I both serve in those roles in our building, and we have another person that does. So that's good to have an administrator, someone that can make the calls, that has lots of experience, that can kind of help really lead the team through those decisions that you're going to have to make. Plus, you need a couple people to respond that are trained in whatever your district has adopted, and then a mental health person, and at times have a nurse respond as well if you're concerned about a student's safety or injury. So, administrator, crisis, a couple people from a crisis team, and then you need to have a nurse and a counselor that needs to respond to that. I would say you need protocols and guidance. What does that look like? When do we call for a crisis? And when we do call for a crisis, what are we doing? So written out protocols and what that looks like. So there is some type of system in place. Communication. How is the team communicating? So we have radios separate for just our response team, and we're all on the same channel. So we can kind of hear the chatter of what's going on and then be notified immediately and can kind of identify who needs to respond. And then having some regular communication when you do respond, debriefing with the team. Hey, we talked about this. This happened today. And as we're thinking, I think we maybe over responded today. We had too many people responding today. Or I think we did a great job with that, but here's this other thing we can do to improve. So you need to have constant reflection and communication to improve your practice with your team.
Yeah. Yeah. I think you hit on all those things that, I'd kind of thought of, that team of trained people, a general plan. I think that's really important because I think once something is actually happening, people need a plan to follow. So because otherwise you're going to forget like what even was just talked about. So they potentially even need like a real basic, like this is who you call kind of plan, because I think all of us, when something starts happening, we get flustered or, you're trying to make 12 decisions at once, and that's really hard. Like it's not just easy to do. I thought too, just one of the things we hear about so often, there's like not space. Like schools are really, space locked. That's not right. What am I looking for?
Yeah, schools are overcrowded right now.
Yeah, so there's not rooms or places for people to go that aren't typically being used. So I think like you need to have a place where if a kid is experiencing something that's a little bit more extreme than normal, or even like they're just super extra emotional about something, or it's been like a rough week for them in whatever way, like a place that they can go that's a little bit more isolated, private, I guess maybe is the word I'm looking for.
And you're not talking about a seclusion room, right? You're talking about Just to
like
clarify for people, you're not talking about a seclusion room. We're talking about a classroom where they could go and have a little more low key time.
Yeah,
right?
like an extra, extra place that's used for when a kid needs to do testing, or something.
Yeah.
But you need to know where that place is and those options are so that people can offer that and a kid can go there and that it's understood, that it's not just
like a reset area.
Yeah, exactly. Because you don't want to be trying to figure all of that out in a moment because people start getting panicky real quick.
Like, where are we going to go?
Yeah, like, where do we go? And then,
and
then like 6 people are talking. Then a lot of people are like moving around fast. It amplifies the situation, right? It makes it seem like it's way crazier than what it is when maybe a kid just needs 5 minutes in a quiet place without their peers looking at them to cry because they're super sad about whatever has happened. So I think that's like a really easy accomplishable thing to find really quick.
Yeah. Before we move on to like actually getting into like the actual crisis part, which we're going to get into next, I just thought I would share some statistics too about like just what's going on
Ooh,
right
let's
now.
hear statistics. So excited to hear statistics.
Now, if you go on the Alliance Against Restraint and Seclusion, Guy Stevens' work, if you're not following them on Facebook, he's got a webpage. He's really leading reform with restraint and seclusion and how we respond to kids in crisis. So I love he gives great presentations. So I'm sure that will be linked on our video, but
Yeah,
here
stuff just happens. Josh just does stuff.
it
It's
makes
fine.
things happen. But I think here's the other part when we look at how we're responding and as we talk through before a crisis. This is why the before the crisis part is so important. Restraint and seclusion is used disproportionately for kids with disabilities, our Black and brown students, and boys. So elementary school students are way more likely to be restrained in schools. That makes sense, right? Their
Sure.
kids are smaller, so we feel
Yeah.
like we can grab for that control, right?
We can make them do what we want to do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Children who are placed in more restrictive settings are way more likely to be restrained or secluded, and children with trauma background are more likely to be restrained and secluded as well. So all those things, as we're looking through, as you think of why some restraint and seclusion law is shifting and changing, and as we're looking through why we need to do this pre-part really, really well, so that we're not getting into the in the crisis or post-crisis.
Yes.
So there's the data there, and the Office of Civil Rights just also is reporting that students that, with disabilities are restrained and secluded more often than typical students. And even though students with disabilities account for 13% of all students, 80% of students that are restrained and secluded are students with disabilities right now. So disproportionate
It is.
as
yeah.
we're responding. So just think about all that stuff as you hear us talking about the change in school discipline or reform and those kind of things, and why this next part we're going to talk about is so important
Yes.
to help prevent and correct some of the statistics that are out there right now.
Yeah, and I think too sometimes we hear those statistics and they make us feel uncomfortable as people, which is fine. And people in education, because we somehow feel like it's a commentary like on us individually. And then we can like attach that, which is so annoying to me at this point in time. But like we can attach that to like politics for whatever reason. We
Yeah.
attach them to like this side or that side of politics is what that means. These are just they're purely just statistics that are
Yeah.
numbers. Like it has nothing to do with you individually. But I do think that it's interesting when it does make us feel uncomfortable that we hear that. Like why and what does that mean and what does that mean that we should do? Because I think usually we feel uncomfortable either because maybe we recognize ourselves in the statistics or because we recognize that it's probably true, and that means there's something in us somewhere that maybe makes us feel like we should probably be doing something about it.
Yeah.
And I think that those aren't bad parts of our inner dialogue to listen to. But don't hear those statistics and get frustrated, or if you do, maybe dig a little bit deeper to wonder why you are frustrated by it. That's just my own aside. I don't know, because I get it can be frustrating to like have to hear statistics and then immediately be told that you're one way or the other because you told statistics that are just facts. I don't know.
Yeah, it's just facts of what's going on. So
Yeah.
if we look at all that, what are we going to do before a crisis occurs? So this is the part that's really important we're talking about right now.
Exactly. So before a crisis, and this is hopefully where we're spending most of our effort is spent on prevention. Like if you're not spending most of your effort on prevention, then and you look at like proportionally, like what are you spending your effort on in crisis moments, and it's mostly on like during the moment or talking about what happens after. Like you're probably I don't know if you tell people you're doing it wrong. You're doing it wrong. Like if you're spending most of your time doing that, most of your time should be spent on the prevention part of it. I feel like we've kind of hit that over and over again already, but I think it's just really true. I think talking about some of the preparation, like we already talked about above, like having a plan, having places to go, having people that are trained. I think those are all important things, obviously. And then I also think like training the staff on preventative measures. So like we have like a team, that's great to have like a team, but I think the staff in general needs to have some kind of training, whether it's training on just trauma in general, trauma-informed care, like really solid, like tier 1, like kind of beginning. Everybody gets this, everybody gets these accommodations, these kind of things that are available to them. So those tier 1 supports, I think that's super important, and having like a really solid set of that and understanding of why those things are happening for the whole staff. Because I think if the whole staff knows how to help keep kids in a regulated spot in the first place, then we're obviously going to see fewer crisis
Yeah.
situations. That's kind of my take. And so that sounds easy to rattle those things off, but training a whole building of staff or a whole district of staff is it's actually a pretty daunting task. I mean, there's when we talk about training in our building or in our district or places we've been other times in our career, it's a lot, and it's even some of this really basic preventative, before a crisis kind of stuff is easily years long of kind of training to help people get and understand it. So it's something that if you're a building administrator or even a staff member at a building, and this is the kind of stuff that you're like, we do kind of have a handful of crises, or we definitely don't know how to respond when there's crisis, and we have it happen enough that people then have like really big reactions. I think it's worth trying to figure out what the plan is. Like how do we start making sure everybody understands some really basic things about kids and how their brains work in whatever way is appropriate for whatever grade level, you're at. So high school is going to look a little bit different than elementary school or a, pre-K kind of place.
Brains are
Yeah.
developed at different stages at that point. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. I just kept on thinking about same thing, the training, the tier 1 practices. And I think essentially that's why we started this podcast, because
Yeah,
I mean,
absolutely.
the first, 8 episodes that we're going to go through are basically just some information. If you don't feel like you can lead the PD, hopefully the podcast is a tool for you to listen to go help teach your district, or it is at least some information that really every teacher in America needs to have right now, and that our job is just to get the information in people's hands. Because once you understand about relationships, you understand about regulation, those two things will come up over and over and over again as
absolutely.
those foundational tier 1 practices. And I think we've said this in those episodes. We don't mean just have a relationship with a kid. It's really, what does that even look like in a tier 1 setting, and what am I actually intentionally doing to establish that, and really understanding about how the brain works in regulation, and getting your teachers to have capacity and knowledge to understand that we start noticing. So one of the things I said was look for triggers.
Yeah.
Get to know your kids. Have those relationships so well. I think you say, came off the bus and I've noticed that they were in the same clothes as yesterday. It might be kind of a tough day today. Or, sometimes I can tell by some kids' hair, like that day, like
Sure.
their hair looks like, okay, this is how today is going to roll as soon as they come off the bus. And so we're going to adjust from the get-go and not assume that normal is going to happen today. We can see kids are sometimes coming in really loud, their voice volume. So start looking for some of those things are really emotional or shut down that we might need to adjust from the start, because we know our kids so well that we can make those adjustments as we start our day. And I think you do this great for your classroom and your kids. I think communicating the vibe in the room, like, hey, they feel off. I think we do that all the time. This feels off today, just so you know, I'm going to need to do this today instead, and letting the whole team know what that looks like and how can we support and adjust.
Yeah. Yeah. I think too, like we can, if you look at those kids that never have a problem, right? Like the kids that are always basically fine. And then we can maybe jump to some quick conclusions, like, oh, like they were just being really awful today. That's so weird. Well, like there's probably a reason, for the kid, or like this kid always is paying attention, great student, and today they just have their head down a lot. I mean, and I think most teachers land here, but to be extra aware and to have those quick conversations, utilize hopefully the relationship you have built to be like, hey, are you doing okay? Like I noticed. It's great to tell kids you notice at every age.
Yeah.
Right? Like sometimes we steer clear of that at really young ages, but I think at every age to go up and be like, hey, I just wanted to let you know, like not in front of everybody, not like you're up at your desk and this kid sits in the back and you're like, John, I noticed that you're laying your head down. You never like, what's going on? Well, John's not going to tell you. But to go up and have like those quiet conversations of like, hey, are you doing okay? Like, don't worry about the work today. Like, you're not in trouble, anything like that. Tell me, like, what are you okay? And if you need to lay your head down today, that's fine. You never do this. Are you feeling okay? You need to see the nurse,
Yeah.
No, you don't. Like, well, something's up. And not you have to force a kid to tell you something, but I think letting them know that it's okay that they're having an off day.
Yeah.
Because sometimes those kids that are really high achieving and like really quote unquote, like are really good kids, they can really freak out if they know, because they're not, kids aren't oblivious. If they know they're having a really off day and then they feel like they're going to let you down,
Yeah.
or they feel like they're going to get in trouble. Like that's like a big thing. Like, oh, I better like keep with, I need to like get my head up and like, but I'm clearly not doing well today. And like, but I don't want to get in trouble. And like, that would be devastating to me. And they almost never even raise their hand in class, like to ask them and like, let them know, give them permission to be a human and have an off day. Like,
yeah.
it's
Anxiety in schools right now with kids is through the roof. I mean, it's just incredible pressure kids are feeling right now, and we're starting to see it. I also started thinking about starting to think ahead of time. This kid's off today, so just thinking this he may be in crisis later, or she may be in crisis later. What is my plan going to be? Already start thinking and communicating with your team, like, hey, they're off. I'm going to adjust here. If something happens, this is my plan for these other kids in the classroom, or we're going to go ahead and just be proactive and maybe go back to one of those more low-key spots in the room or adjust, or in the school and adjust. But really start thinking about what's my plan, because this kid's off, and I know this kid so well that I know it can go really high, really fast, and I'm going to have to be prepared and ready, and already start communicating to those team members, hey, just let you know, this kid's off today. Just kind of have your radio extra close, have that, let's think about some things that we can do, but really start forward thinking about the plan. And then how can I be proactive to avoid triggers, to reduce, like you just said, reduce those expectations, promote regulation.
Yeah.
They're in their downstairs brain, or maybe in the fight or flight, which is, I think, the part that teachers start panicking.
Sure,
is he going to run?
Yeah.
We've got runners, right? So we have a plan for the kids that are runners. We have kids that go into fight mode, and some are more aggressive than others, but we have those plans in place, and we are constantly trying to keep the regulation. I think that's part of some of the judgment that comes. We know a kid's really off, and people are like, why aren't you not making them do their reading today? And it's like, oh, we're going to go into fight mode really fast. And that's not what we're about.
We're not
trying to damage relationships and so I think people that maybe this is a new lens for school, like we're trying to keep regulation for this kid right now. Not that there's not expectations, but today's the day I'm not going to push him real hard. So you may see us walking in the halls a little bit more. We might go outside and shoot some hoops. We're trying to get them back to regulation, and sometimes we can, but the days that we can't, so I think that's where some of that questioning or judgment comes from people that don't understand the work or what regulation actually looks like.
Well, it's always hard. It's always hard to make those decisions too. What day is it? Is it a day that, and how many of those days are you okay with? And how, those are questions that I've had in interviews before going into jobs. They're like, well, how do you know? What would you do in this situation? We're like, well, I don't know. Like, it's really hard to make those decisions. One, is this a day I push, or is this a day I not? And is this a day I, hold tight to a general expectation, or is it a day that the expectations for this specific student shifts? I think that's where, again, you have to offer yourself a lot of grace, and hopefully your coworkers a lot of grace, to make those decisions. Because I think that it's really hard. Nobody makes those lightly, and it's difficult to do. I think sometimes the kids that are frequent flyers, in whatever way they react, it's easier to make a plan for. It's the kids that are basically fine all the time.
Yeah.
That then all of a sudden you don't know, is this kid a fighter? Are they going to start throwing stuff? Are they going to, hurt themselves? Are they going to just run? Do they just shut down? We don't know. We have no idea, but we can tell that kid's off today. And I'd maybe rather not find out what their most extreme reaction is. So I need to be, again, preventative, I think.
Yeah. Hopefully we have some things in place for kids that we're responding to all the time, like a functional behavior assessment, which you might hear called an FBA, a behavior intervention plan, which is called a BIP, or a crisis plan. So some kids that you are those frequent flyers, hopefully you have some proactive things in place to help prevent getting to the part we're going to talk about next.
Yeah. All right. Thanks for listening to part 1 of episode 9.